He gave away the last thing keeping him alive, and by midnight, the starving dog came back carrying a dead Marine's name. Snow pressed against the broken windows of the abandoned chapel, whispering across the glass like dry fingers. Inside, Staff Sergeant Caleb Walker lay curled beside a dying fire, his breath shallow, his hands numb beneath a worn field jacket. The air smelled of wet pine, rust, and smoke too weak to warm the room. Somewhere beyond the walls, the Arizona mountains disappeared beneath white darkness. Caleb tried to lift his head, but the effort sent a wave of dizziness through him. His stomach had been empty since morning. His old Ford Bronco sat nearly 2 miles away, out of gas and half buried near the county road. His phone had gone dark before sunset. The last thing he remembered clearly was Ranger standing beside him, one front paw raised, amber eyes fixed on the chapel door. Then the German shepherd had slipped into the storm. 40 minutes had passed, maybe longer. Time had become something loose and unreliable. Caleb stared at the doorway, where snow curled through a gap beneath the warped wood. He told himself the dog had done the sensible thing. Ranger had found a trail, a road, maybe a farmhouse. Animals understood survival better than men who had spent years pretending they did not need saving. Caleb lowered his head against the cold floorboards. Around his neck, 2 dog tags rested beneath his shirt. One belonged to him. The other belonged to Daniel Mercer, the Marine he had carried out of a desert 6 years earlier and had never truly brought home. Caleb closed his eyes. The wind moved through the chapel rafters with a low, hollow moan. Then came another sound, faint at first. A scrape, a pause, 3 quick taps against the porch. Caleb opened his eyes. The door shifted inward. A dark muzzle appeared through the narrow opening, followed by pointed ears dusted white. Ranger forced his way inside, shoulders trembling, sable coat soaked with melting snow. In his mouth, he carried an orange rescue bag, its fabric dragged gray with ice and mud. Caleb pushed himself onto one elbow. "You came back," he whispered. Ranger crossed the room and dropped the bag beside him. The dog's chest rose and fell hard, but his eyes stayed steady, watching Caleb as if waiting for a command. A dark stain marked one side of the bag. Caleb reached toward it, fingers stiff and clumsy. The zipper was partly open. Inside, he saw a silver emergency blanket, a tube of glucose gel, gauze, and a red flare. Enough to keep a man alive. Maybe enough for a dog, too. Then something small clicked against the metal zipper pull. Caleb froze. A dog tag hung from the strap, turning slowly in the firelight. He lifted it closer. The letters were scratched, but clear. Daniel Mercer. For a moment, even the storm seemed to fall silent. Caleb looked from the tag to Ranger. The German shepherd did not sit. He did not rest. He turned toward the open door and stared into the snow, ears forward, body tense. There was blood on the rescue bag, but none on the dog. Caleb understood then. Ranger had not returned only to save him. Someone else was still out there. That morning, before the storm swallowed the mountains, Caleb Walker sat behind the wheel of his old Ford Bronco in the gravel lot behind Martha Ellis's roadside diner, watching his breath fog the cracked windshield. The dashboard clock blinked 6:23, though he no longer trusted it. The fuel gauge rested below empty. A folded notice from the county was tucked beneath one wiper, warning that the vehicle would be towed by sunrise the next day if it remained on private property. Caleb had read it 3 times. Each time, the words felt heavier. In the paper bag on the passenger seat sat one chicken sandwich, bought with the last few dollars in his pocket. No fries, no coffee, just bread, meat, and enough warmth to make his empty stomach tighten. Outside, the morning sky hung low and pale over the pines. A cold front had rolled down from the north, carrying the smell of snow before the first flake had fallen. Martha had offered him coffee inside, but Caleb had seen the kindness in her eyes and could not bear to sit beneath it. Pity had a way of making a man feel smaller than hunger. He reached for the sandwich, then stopped when something moved near the dumpster. At first, he saw only a dark shape slipping between 2 stacks of wooden crates. Then the animal stepped into the gray light. A German shepherd, male, full-grown, thin enough that every breath moved along his ribs. His sable coat was matted with dust, and a torn strip of red nylon hung from his neck where a collar had once been. One front paw barely touched the ground. The dog stood still, watching Caleb through the windshield with amber eyes that held no demand, only caution. Caleb lowered the window. Cold air rushed in. "You picked the wrong truck," he said softly. The shepherd did not move. Caleb unwrapped the sandwich. The smell filled the cab, warm and sharp, and his body answered before his pride could stop it. He had not eaten since the previous afternoon. Still, he broke the sandwich in half and stepped outside. Gravel pressed through the thin soles of his boots. The dog shifted back 2 feet, ears high, weight balanced despite the injured paw. Caleb placed one half on the ground and retreated. "Eat." The shepherd looked at the food, then at Caleb. He did not rush. He waited. Caleb felt something old stir in his chest. Recognition. Training. He raised 2 fingers, palm forward, the silent release signal his unit had used years ago. The dog immediately lowered his head and ate. Caleb went still. "Well," he murmured, "that is not something a stray learns behind a diner." The shepherd finished, then approached the second half still in Caleb's hand. Caleb expected him to take it. Instead, the dog touched the bread with his nose and pushed Caleb's wrist back toward his chest. Caleb stared at him. A laugh almost came, but it caught somewhere behind his ribs. "You are telling me to eat?" The dog sat beside his left leg, perfectly aligned, eyes facing the parking lot as though standing watch. Caleb took one bite. The shepherd's tail tapped the gravel once. Then, from beneath the torn red strap, Caleb saw faint black lettering worn nearly smooth by weather. SR-17. His hand stopped halfway to his mouth. Daniel Mercer had once served with a civilian search and rescue unit that used the same code. Before Caleb could look closer, the shepherd rose sharply. His ears turned toward the tree line. Somewhere beyond the road, hidden among the pines, a distant metallic sound carried through the cold. The dog listened for 3 seconds, then ran toward the forest. Caleb looked at the last bite in his hand, at the empty Bronco, and at the fading shape beneath the trees. Then he followed. Caleb entered the tree line with the last bite of sandwich still in his hand. The cold changed beneath the pines. Wind that had moved freely across the diner lot now broke into narrow currents, slipping between trunks and carrying the smell of damp bark, old snow, and something metallic from deeper in the woods. The German shepherd moved 20 yards ahead, fast but controlled, favoring the injured paw without losing his balance. Every few seconds, he stopped and looked back. Not lost. Checking. Caleb recognized the pattern from patrol dogs trained to guide a slower partner through uncertain ground. "I am coming," he called. The dog turned forward again. Branches scraped against Caleb's jacket as the slope began to rise. His lungs tightened sooner than they should have. Months of poor sleep and missed meals had taken more from him than he liked to admit. Still, the shepherd kept a pace Caleb could follow, never disappearing completely. At the base of a fallen pine, the dog halted and lifted his nose. Caleb reached him and crouched, careful not to touch the wounded paw. Up close, the torn red strap looked older than he first thought. The black lettering was stitched into the nylon, not printed. SR-17. Beneath it, almost hidden by dirt, was a second marking. Mercer County Volunteer Search and Rescue. Caleb's fingers went cold for a reason that had nothing to do with the weather. Daniel had joined a mountain rescue team after leaving active service. He used to write about training weekends, long nights, missing hikers, and a young dog that learned hand signals faster than most people learn names. Caleb had never asked for photographs. At the time, seeing Daniel build a life beyond the core had hurt in ways he did not understand. The shepherd watched him closely. Caleb raised his right hand and gave a silent command to stay. The dog obeyed at once. No hesitation. Caleb tried another, a directional sweep toward the left. The shepherd turned his head and scanned that side of the trail. Then Caleb pointed to the ground and closed his fist. The dog lowered his nose and searched a tight circle before returning to Caleb's knee. "You were working," Caleb whispered. "You belong to somebody." The shepherd's ears shifted toward the trees. That faint metallic sound came again. 3 uneven strikes, followed by silence. It could have been a loose sign swinging in the wind. It could have been a branch hitting old machinery. But the dog reacted as if he knew it. His body tightened. His gaze fixed uphill. Caleb looked at the injured paw. "You are not making that climb alone." He tore a strip from the inside lining of his jacket and wrapped the paw as gently as he could. The shepherd did not pull away. When Caleb finished, The dog touched his nose to the Marine's wrist, then rose. Snow began to fall in thin, dry flakes, barely visible against the gray sky. They moved deeper into the forest. The trail narrowed and bent around a ridge where old wooden markers leaned beneath moss. One marker carried the faded outline of a white cross. Another pointed toward a place called Mercy Chapel, 1.5 miles ahead. Caleb paused beneath it. Daniel had once mentioned a rescue station with a chapel near the old northern route. He had said volunteers left emergency supplies there for anyone caught in bad weather. The shepherd gave one low bark and stepped onto the path. Caleb followed, though a heaviness had begun to settle behind his eyes. After several hundred yards, the dog suddenly stopped. His head lowered. In the snow beside the trail lay a small piece of orange fabric, torn cleanly from something larger. The shepherd sniffed it once, then looked toward the ridge. Far above them, through the darkening pines, a bell rang a single hollow note. The bell rang again, dull and distant, and the German shepherd lifted his head as if the sound had called him by name. Caleb followed his gaze through the pines. The trail climbed sharply now, bending beneath branches heavy with fresh snow. The orange fabric in Caleb's hand fluttered once in the wind before he tucked it into his pocket. Mercy Chapel, he said, more to himself than to the dog. Let us hope the name still means something. The shepherd moved ahead, slower than before. His wrapped paw left a faint, uneven track beside Caleb's boots. Snow thickened around them, turning the forest quiet in the way only winter could, as if every tree had drawn in a breath and refused to let it go. Caleb's legs began to feel hollow. He had eaten only one bite of the sandwich. The rest had gone to the dog, and the little warmth it gave him was already fading. Still, he kept moving. At the top of the ridge, the trees opened around a small wooden chapel leaning against the storm. Its white paint had peeled to gray. One shutter hung loose, tapping the wall with each gust. Above the door, a rusted bell swung beneath a narrow steeple, moved by the wind. The metallic sound they had followed was not a signal after all. It was only weather speaking through old iron. Caleb stopped, disappointed by how deeply that mattered. The shepherd did not. He crossed the porch and pressed his nose to the door. Caleb tried the handle. It gave after one hard push. Inside, the air smelled of dust, wet wood, and ashes long gone cold. A few narrow pews faced a plain wooden cross. Along the back wall stood a cabinet marked emergency supplies, but when Caleb opened it, he found only an empty water jug, 2 brittle bandages, and a box of matches softened by damp. Of course, he murmured. The shepherd circled once, then lowered himself near the wall. His breathing had grown faster. Caleb knelt beside him and unwrapped the injured paw. The cut was shallow, but the skin around it felt hot beneath his fingers. You need a veterinarian, Caleb said. I need a miracle with better timing. He found a rusted metal basin beneath the cabinet and used melting snow to clean the wound. The shepherd washed without resistance, amber eyes steady even when Caleb's hands began to shake. Caleb tore another strip from his jacket lining and wrapped the paw again. Then he searched the chapel for anything that could burn. Olden pages, broken chair legs, a stack of dry kindling hidden beneath the altar. The matches failed twice before one caught. A small flame rose, fragile and yellow, and Caleb cupped both hands around it until the wood began to crackle. Warmth came slowly. Not enough. Never enough. He sat with his back against a pew, pulling the shepherd close beneath his jacket. Outside, the wind grew louder. Snow pressed against the windows. The light beyond them dimmed from gray to blue. Caleb's vision blurred at the edges. He closed his eyes for what he meant to be 1 second. Somewhere in that drifting space between memory and sleep, he heard Daniel laughing beside a rescue truck, saying the mountain always told you where to look if you stopped pretending you knew everything. Caleb opened his eyes. The shepherd was no longer resting. He stood before a faded map nailed beside the door, scratching at one corner with his good paw. Caleb forced himself upright and crossed the room. The map showed the old northern rescue route, the chapel, and a ridge trail marked in red. Near the top, someone had written a name in black ink. Mercer Ridge. Caleb touched the words. Behind him, the shepherd turned toward the door. No, Caleb said. We stay here. The dog looked back once, then pushed through the opening into the storm. Caleb called after him, but the snow swallowed the sound. The door struck the outer wall and swung back beneath the weight of the wind. Caleb reached it too late. Beyond the porch, the German Shepherd was already a dark shape moving through the white, following the red trail toward Mercer Ridge. "Come back," Caleb called, but the storm broke his voice apart and carried it into the trees. He stood in the doorway until the cold forced him back inside. For several seconds, anger kept him upright. Then the anger thinned into something older. Of course the dog had left. Everything living eventually chose the road away from him. Caleb pushed the door shut and braced a broken pew against it. The chapel seemed smaller now. The fire had fallen to a weak orange glow, and the wind found every crack in the walls. He lowered himself beside the hearth, pressing his palms toward the heat, though he could barely feel his fingers. The second dog tag beneath his shirt rested against his chest like a small piece of ice. Daniel had once told him that guilt was just grief looking for somewhere to stand. Caleb had laughed then. He had been younger, certain that anything could be carried if a man kept moving. Now he understood how wrong that was. Outside, the storm deepened. Snow hissed against the windows. Minutes stretched without shape. Caleb checked the doorway again and again, listening for pause, a bark, anything. Nothing came. His body began to shake harder, then strangely less. He knew enough medicine to understand that the quieting was not good. He gathered the silver lining from an old altar cloth around his shoulders and tried to keep his eyes open. "Smart dog," he whispered into the empty room. "Find somebody warmer." The fire gave a small crack and collapsed inward. Caleb watched the last flame bend low. He thought of the Bronco behind the diner, the towing notice under the wiper, Martha's untouched coffee, the half sandwich placed on gravel. Such small things. A man's life could narrow until it fit inside a paper bag. Then something hit the porch. Once. Twice. A dragging sound followed. Caleb raised his head. The door shifted against the pew. A low whine came from the other side. He crawled across the floor and pulled the wood away. The German Shepherd pushed inside, covered in snow, his breath coming fast. An orange rescue bag hung from his mouth. He dropped it at Caleb's knees, then staggered but remained standing. "You came back," Caleb said. His voice broke around the words. The dog watched him, waiting. Caleb opened the bag with clumsy hands. Inside lay emergency gauze, a thermal blanket, a flare, and 2 tubes of glucose gel. He tore one open with his teeth and swallowed. The sweetness burned across his tongue. Heat did not return at once, but the room stopped tilting. He wrapped the thermal blanket around both of them and pressed his forehead briefly against the dog's. That was when he saw the silver tag caught on the zipper. He lifted it toward the fire. Daniel Mercer. The name was worn, but there was no mistaking it. Caleb's breath stopped. The German Shepherd turned toward the door and gave one sharp bark. Caleb looked down at the side of the bag. A dark stain marked the fabric, fresh against the orange. He checked the dog quickly. The shepherd was cold and exhausted, but the stain was not his. Somewhere beyond the chapel, someone had carried this bag. Someone connected to Daniel. Someone who had not made it back. Caleb closed his fist around the tag. "Show me," he said. The dog stepped into the storm again, slower now, trusting Caleb to follow. Caleb followed the German Shepherd into the storm with the orange rescue bag strapped across his shoulder and Daniel Mercer's tag clenched in one hand. The glucose had steadied him, but only barely. Each breath scraped cold through his chest. Snow reached above his ankles and gathered along the seams of his boots. Ahead, the shepherd moved with his nose low, choosing the trail by scent more than sight. His injured paw slipped twice, yet he kept going. Caleb wanted to order him back. Instead, he trusted him. The red route on the chapel map curved north toward Mercer Ridge, then dropped into a narrow service road used by volunteer rescue crews. In clear weather, the distance would have been less than a mile. In the storm, it felt endless. The forest had lost all color except white, black, and the faint rust of pine bark. Then Ranger stopped. He stood at the edge of a shallow ravine, ears forward. Below them, partly hidden beneath drifting snow, lay a rescue truck tilted against a stand of young trees. One amber hazard light blinked weakly through the weather. Ranger descended first. Caleb followed sideways, using branches for balance. Near the passenger side, a man lay beneath a thermal tarp, conscious but unable to stand. His orange jacket matched the torn fabric Caleb had found beside the trail. One leg was pinned awkwardly beneath fallen equipment, but there was no visible wound, only the stiffness of cold and exhaustion. The man turned his face toward them. He was in his early 40s, with a graying beard and eyes so familiar that Caleb stopped moving. "Caleb Walker?" the man asked. The sound of his own name in that place felt impossible. Caleb knelt beside him. "Who are you?" The man looked at the dog, and relief softened his expression. "Thomas Mercer." Caleb stared at him. Thomas touched the empty chain around his neck. "You found Danny's tag." The words reached a place Caleb had kept sealed for 6 years. Ranger pressed close to Thomas, whining softly, and Thomas rested a trembling hand against the shepherd's neck. "His name is Ranger," he said. "He was my search dog. We lost each other in a slide 3 months ago." Caleb looked at the torn red collar, the stitched code, the dog who had crossed winter alone and still returned for strangers. "He found you today." Thomas shook his head. "He found you first." Caleb opened the rescue bag and wrapped another thermal layer around him. The radio inside gave only static. The truck's beacon was failing. Daylight had almost disappeared. Caleb examined the equipment pinning Thomas and found a way to shift it with a length of rescue rope and a broken branch used as a lever. His hands worked from memory. Secure the line. Check the weight. Move slowly. The old rhythm returned, steady and exact. Thomas watched him in silence until Caleb reached for the knot near his shoulder. "Danny talked about you," he said. Caleb's hand stopped. "He should not have. He said you carried him 6 miles after the evacuation vehicle could not reach you." Caleb looked away. "I did not save him." Thomas's voice remained quiet. "No, but you did not leave him." The mountains seemed to fall silent around them. For years, Caleb had remembered only the final moment, never the miles before it, never Daniel's hand gripping his jacket, never the promise kept until there was nothing left to carry. Ranger leaned against Caleb's side, warm despite the snow. Caleb closed his eyes once, then opened them. "We are getting you out," he said. Thomas managed a faint smile. "That sounds like an order." Caleb tightened the rope, checked Ranger's position, and looked toward the ridge above. One flare remained, one chance to be seen, and the storm was growing darker. Caleb studied the slope above them and knew the ravine would swallow the flare if he fired it from below. The nearest clear point stood almost 50 feet higher, where the service road crossed the ridge. In better weather, it would have been an easy climb. Now the snow had buried the path. Thomas could not stand, and Caleb's strength was fading by the minute. He opened the rescue bag and found 100 feet of rope, a compact pulley, and a folded drag tarp. Not enough for comfort, enough for a chance. Ranger watched every movement. Caleb spread the tarp beside Thomas, secured it beneath his shoulders and legs, then tied the rope through the reinforced loops. "We move together," he said. Thomas looked toward the ridge. "You cannot pull me up that alone." Caleb glanced at Ranger. "I am not alone." He looped the rope through the shepherd's harness point beneath the torn red strap, careful to keep the pressure away from the injured paw. Ranger stood still, understanding the purpose before Caleb finished the knot. Caleb pointed uphill and gave the silent forward command. Ranger leaned into the line. The rope tightened. The tarp moved 6 inches, then a foot. Caleb pushed from behind, while Thomas used both hands to steady himself against the snow. The climb began slowly, measured in breaths and short gains. Ranger dug with 3 strong paws, body low, shoulders working beneath the sable coat. Caleb lifted, pushed, and reset the rope around trees whenever the angle became too steep. Snow filled his collar. His fingers burned, then went numb. "Easy," he said. "One more step." Whether he spoke to Ranger, Thomas, or himself, he did not know. Halfway up, the rope slipped against a frozen root. The tarp slid backward several inches. Ranger dropped his chest to the ground and held. Caleb braced both boots against a rock and caught Thomas before the movement carried him farther. For one suspended moment, no one breathed. Then Thomas whispered, "Good dog." Ranger's ears turned back at the sound, but he did not release the line. Caleb secured a new anchor, and they continued. The ridge seemed to recede each time they looked at it. Darkness gathered between the trees. The weak hazard light below vanished behind the snow. At last, Ranger reached the service road and pulled himself onto level ground. Caleb followed with the tarp, then collapsed to one knee. Thomas lay still beneath the thermal blanket, eyes open but unfocused. Caleb checked his breathing. Steady. Too slow, but steady. He removed the flare from the bag. The wind had shifted north, carrying snow in hard sheets across the ridge. "This has to be high enough," Thomas said. Caleb looked toward the sky. Nothing. No aircraft. No headlights. No sign that anyone knew where they were. He tried to raise the flare, but his arm trembled so badly that he could not hold it upright. Ranger stepped close and pressed his shoulder against Caleb's side. Caleb rested one hand on the dog's back until the shaking eased. Then he planted the flare tube in a mound of packed snow and pulled the cap free. The firing cord had frozen stiff. He tugged once. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. Caleb bent over it, using both hands, but his grip failed. Ranger watched him. Then the shepherd lowered his head, caught the cord gently between his teeth, and pulled backward. A sharp hiss cut through the storm. Red fire leaped into the night, rising above the pines and painting the snow the color of sunrise. For 3 seconds, the whole mountain glowed. Then the flare arced beyond the ridge and disappeared. Silence returned. Caleb sank beside Thomas. Ranger stood facing the darkness, ears high. Far away, beyond the storm, came a sound that did not belong to the mountain. One long horn, then another. Ranger barked once, and somewhere below, faint but unmistakable, an answering siren began to climb. The siren grew louder, then faded, then returned from a different direction as the rescue vehicles searched for the ridge road beneath the snow. Caleb raised one arm and waved, though he knew no one could see him through the trees. Ranger stood at the edge of the road, barking in measured bursts, pausing between each one to listen. The pattern was not panic. It was guidance. 3 barks. Silence. 3 more. From below came the distant answer of a horn. Thomas stirred beneath the thermal blanket. "They hear him," he said. Caleb looked at the shepherd and felt something inside him loosen. Not relief yet. Something quieter. Trust. Minutes later, white beams cut through the storm. A snow vehicle rounded the bend, followed by 2 county rescue trucks moving slowly in its tracks. Men and women in orange jackets stepped into the road carrying blankets, medical bags, and a collapsible stretcher. Ranger did not rush them. He stayed beside Caleb until one of the rescuers knelt and checked Thomas. Only then did the dog lower himself into the snow. His strength had run out exactly where it was allowed to. Caleb dropped beside him and placed both hands around his shoulders. "You did enough," he whispered. "You hear me? You did enough." The next hours came in fragments. Warm lights. A heated ambulance. The soft hiss of oxygen. Someone wrapping Caleb's hands. Someone else carrying Ranger toward a veterinary transport unit while the dog twisted his head to keep Caleb in sight. At the small regional hospital outside Flagstaff, Caleb woke beneath clean blankets with an intravenous line taped to his arm. Morning light pressed pale gold against the window. For the first time in months, he was warm without having to earn it. Thomas rested in the room across the hall. His condition was stable. Ranger had been taken to Dr. Emily Carter's clinic 3 blocks away. Caleb asked to leave before breakfast. The nurse refused. He asked again. 2 hours later, wearing donated clothes and his weathered boots, he entered the clinic lobby with Daniel's tag in his pocket. The room smelled of antiseptic, coffee, and clean fur. Dr. Carter met him beside a row of recovery kennels. She was in her early 40s, with tired blue eyes and the calm voice of someone who had learned not to waste words. "He has a mild infection in the paw, dehydration, and exhaustion," she said. "Nothing we cannot treat." Caleb looked through the glass. Ranger lay beneath a blanket, one ear lifting at the sound of his voice. "He belongs to Thomas Mercer." Emily studied him for a moment. "He did." Thomas arrived later that afternoon in a wheelchair, one leg braced, a county blanket around his shoulders. Ranger stood when he saw him. His tail moved once, then faster. Thomas opened the kennel and let the shepherd press against his chest. No one spoke. The reunion belonged to them. Caleb stepped back toward the door. He had nearly reached it when Thomas called his name. "Ranger cannot return to mountain duty," he said. "His paw will heal, but the strain and the months outside changed him." Caleb nodded, unsure why the words hurt. Thomas removed the torn red strap and held it in both hands. "He found me because of training," he said. "He came back to that chapel because he chose to." Caleb looked at Ranger. The dog had left Thomas's side and now stood between them, watching Caleb with the same steady amber eyes from the diner lot. Thomas extended the collar. "Danny believed some partners find us after the mission is over." Caleb did not take it at first. "I have no house. Emily needs help at the recovery center," Thomas said. Someone who understands working dogs. Someone who understands men who do not know what comes next. Emily folded her arms. It is a job, Caleb, not charity. Ranger crossed the space between them and sat against Caleb's left leg, perfectly aligned. The same position as that morning. Caleb looked down at him, then accepted the red collar. For the first time in years, tomorrow did not feel like an empty road. 6 months later, morning sunlight rested across the windows of the Mercer Ridge Recovery Center, turning the polished floor the color of honey. Outside, snow still covered the higher slopes, but the valley had begun to thaw. Water moved beneath the ice in thin silver lines. Caleb stood near the training yard with a clipboard in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other, watching 3 veterans guide rescued working dogs through a simple line of orange cones. He wore clean boots now. A dark green jacket carried the center's small stitched emblem over the heart. Daniel's tag hung beside his own beneath the fabric, no longer an anchor, only a memory with a place to rest. Ranger moved beside him with an easy gait. The paw had healed, though he still favored it after long sessions. His sable coat had grown thick and clean, and the red collar had been repaired, the faded letters left untouched. Caleb had refused to replace it. Some things did not need to look new to mean home. Across the yard, Thomas Mercer stood with a cane, laughing as one of the younger dogs ignored a training marker and proudly delivered a glove to the wrong person. His recovery had taken time, but he had returned to the center twice a week. He never asked Caleb to speak about Daniel. He simply made room for the silence until it became less heavy. Dr. Emily Carter stepped onto the porch and called that lunch was ready. The group drifted inside, dogs first, people following. Caleb remained outside for another moment. The air smelled of cedar, coffee, and wet earth emerging beneath the snow. Ranger sat at his left side, posture straight, eyes on the open gate. Still standing watch, Caleb said. Ranger looked up, tail brushing the ground once. Later, when the building had grown quiet, Caleb carried 2 wrapped sandwiches to the front porch. He sat on the wooden step where the afternoon sun reached through the pines. Ranger settled beside him. Caleb unwrapped one sandwich and placed half on a napkin near the dog. Wait, he said. Ranger did not move. Caleb lifted 2 fingers, palm forward, the same signal he had given behind Martha Ellis's diner. Eat. Ranger lowered his head, took one careful bite, then stopped. Caleb smiled. Do not start. The shepherd picked up the remaining piece, turned, and placed it gently on Caleb's knee. For a few seconds, Caleb only looked at it. He remembered the gravel lot, the empty fuel gauge, the notice beneath the windshield wiper, and the quiet shame of having nowhere to go. He remembered how small his life had become that morning. One truck, one meal, one more night. Ranger rested his chin against Caleb's leg. Caleb broke the piece in 2 and gave half back. Fair enough, he said. They ate in silence while the sun lowered behind Mercer Ridge. Through the open window came the soft sounds of the center settling into evening. A bowl placed on a floor. A dog turning in its bed. Thomas telling someone a story that ended in laughter. On the wall inside, Daniel's second tag hung beside Ranger's old strip of torn nylon and a photograph of the rescue team beneath the red glow of a flare. Caleb had once believed mercy was something given by people who had more than enough. Now he knew better. Sometimes mercy came from the hungry. Sometimes it walked on an injured paw through a storm. Sometimes it carried back no money, no promise, and no easy answer. Only the one thing a lost soul needed most. Proof that he had not been left behind. Ranger nudged Caleb's hand. Caleb placed his palm against the dog's warm neck and watched the last light move across the snow. Neither of them needed saving that evening. They only needed to stay.